Hey everyone, how's it going? So today's video is going to be a little bit different from what we've been doing. I know last week was a heavy emphasis on that Star Wars game I play. You can expect 2 videos on that same topic this week. So I forgot, but it's usually, I think, a 3-week thing, so you'll have 3 matches per week. The second wave of that, I'm not sure how to refer to it actually. Excuse me. Those you'll get 2 videos from that because I kind of botched filming the first one, and I kind of go explain a little bit in one of my other videos and why. That's going to be the other 2 videos for this week. Today we're going to be talking about Superman Red Son. People who know comics a little bit, or just like a little bit about comics or anything like that, you're going to recognize the title because this is a pretty old comic. It was one of the Elseworld titles from. I'm not really sure how old it is, honestly. I just know it's a little bit older. They recently made it into a DC animated film. Now, if you have seen any of the animated films, typically with their animated films, they've all been part of like a shared universe and stuff like that, especially after Justice League War. That one really kicked it off because they kind of rebooted, in a sense, their animated universe and started every movie after that kind of took place in that shared universe. So this one is not part of that. It's its own thing. Even in the description for the movie, it's like, oh, this is an Elseworlds title. Check out this crazy story. So this video is going to be, the first half is going to be non-spoiler, and then the second half is going to be spoiler. So I'll, again, remind you when I'm going to start going into spoilers. So now, I have read Red Son. I do own it. I've only read it like once or twice though, and it's been a while. So I'll do probably sometime next week. I'll create a video comparing the animation to the comic itself, and then kind of like a review on in-depth dig into the story of the comic. Based on what I do remember, it's pretty accurate. There's a lot of similarities, but of course, with these animated movies and movies in general, they kind of take some liberties with some of the stuff. Tweak something here, tweak something there, make this a little bit different. Some of the changes I don't mind. Some of the changes I thought were kind of dumb, and we'll get into that in a second. So overall, I thought from what I remember, the story was pretty close to what the original was. I know the original one was pretty good. What I remember reading of it, I just remember the ending was kind of funky. Like it wasn't very clear. And I got to go back and reread it, obviously, because I said I'm going to do that for one of next week's videos. But this animation is very good as far as quality goes. The animation is on point. There's never times during the movie where the animation changes for some reason. There's some movies that do that sometimes. Mostly everything looks like it's drawn correctly, like it's supposed to. They didn't, nothing made it past the editing that wasn't supposed to. I thought the voice acting was pretty good, all things considered. I mean, everybody had to throw on, a lot of characters had to throw on Russian accents and stuff, and it's kind of it's just weird to hear almost, because you get this idea of who Superman is as a character and everything, and you think, oh, he's from Kansas, he's an American, and then all of a sudden this story comes out where he crash lands in Soviet Russia, and it's like, whoa, so Superman's speaking with it's like one of those things where the voice doesn't match what you see, and it's kind of weird at first. That's for a majority of well, I shouldn't say majority, just a handful of characters really, because most of the other ones do remain Americans. So yeah, just staying non-spoiler, a majority of, or there's a handful of characters involved with the story. So obviously Superman is involved, Wonder Woman is involved, Batman is involved, a handful of the Green Lanterns are. So Hal Jordan is the main one, John Stewart's in there, and Guy Gardner is in there. None of the alien Green Lanterns are in there, not even the original one that gave Hal the ring. It's not even the same alien, it's a different one. Lex Luthor obviously is in it, Lois Lane is. A different version of Lana is in the movie. Lana, if you guys ever watched the Smallville TV show or something like that, is one of the people Clark Kent grew up with in Smallville. They tweaked it a little bit for this version, but there is a version of Lana in this movie. And then Brainiac. I think those are all the major players that are in the movie, without getting into spoilers, of course. So that's about it. So a handful of really well-known characters and a few minor characters from here and there from different parts of the DC universe. So yeah, the movie was very good. I thought it was very well done. I thought again the production was good. Voice acting was pretty good. None of the voice acting like took me out of it. Like, oh, they're trying too hard for a Russian accent or anything like that. And as far as the lore standpoint, I think this does a pretty good job of not making one character look too good. I think it does a really good job of that, actually. Um, so I don't know what else to say as far as non-spoiler goes. The movie, I think, was pretty long. It was almost an hour 30, hour 40 minutes long. So not too bad. And then it doesn't feel slow. Like they spend an appropriate amount of time building up. I guess I'll save that for the spoiler side. But yeah, I think that's about it. I think it's available. I watched it on DC Universe, and then I know it's already been out on DVD for a few months now. It takes time for whatever reason for them to upload it to DC Universe, but it might be available on HBO Max or something like that. So if you don't have DC Universe and you have one of the other streaming services, you might be able to find it. I'm not entirely sure. But if you want to like Redbox it or something for $2, I'd say yeah, it's enjoyable. I really liked it, especially if you're a fan of Justice League or DC characters in general, or if you just really like Superman. I think it's a very interesting take on the character because it's such a major twist from what we know Superman to be. And with that said, let's go into the spoilers. So I already mentioned this before, but this story is about Clark Kent landing obviously as an infant in Soviet Russia as opposed to America. And he's raised by Soviets and stuff like that or whatever. So when you're first introduced to him, he's like running away from bullies, and then this who we learn kind of later on, or I mean, if you paid more attention than I did, you would recognize right away that's supposed to be like a Russian version of his childhood friend, Lana Lang. She like shows up and saves him, punches one of the kids, and the kid's like, "Oh, if you were a dude, blah blah blah," and they run away. And he's like, "Well, I wasn't running away because I was afraid they would hurt me. I was afraid of hurting them." And then he lifts a truck, and he's like 12 years old at this point. Lifts a truck or a tractor over his head, and she's like, "Well, you need to volunteer your services to the state." So from there, he ends up enlisting or whatever, turning himself over, and he starts working for Joseph Stalin because it takes place in the 40s. I think 46 to be exact. I could be wrong though. I can't remember. Sometime in the 40s. So he enlists with Stalin. Of course, this is a fictional universe, so if he wasn't alive in real history at that point, then we'll deal with it. It's a fictional story. So he enlists, becomes basically like the right hand of Russia, and he's like in propaganda videos and like, "Hey, look out! The West, we're coming for you," type thing. So kind of like it's not political, but it's like hyping up what was happening at the time for the sake of the story, and I believe that's how it was written too, whenever it was written. So you get so the president turns to Lex Luthor, who is at this point married to Lois Lane, who is in this universe still a reporter or whatever, and Lex is enlisted by the president to find a solution to Superman. So it takes some pretty interesting twists and turns. Superman ends up meeting with Lois Lane. It was orchestrated by Lex Luthor. He got one of the Russian satellites to fall into orbit or whatever, so it's going to crash land on Metropolis. But Superman shows up, takes the satellite, makes it land in the ocean, and then he kind of has a little interaction with Lois Lane where she's like, "Hey, so are you afraid of the press?" And he's like, "No, I just don't want you twisting my words." And they get into a little interaction, and it basically leads to Superman showing up for an interview. And Lois Lane reveals to him this file of like all these terrible things that Stalin is doing in the background. He's like, no, this isn't true. And then he flies off, and he basically finds where Stalin is like keeping all these people, and they're like slaves doing whatever kind of work in mines and things like that, or they're just oppressed people shut away from the world. And then he sees Lana Lang, okay, very important note, he sees Batman. I don't think they ever say his real name, but it's just some dude or some little kid next to his parents who are presumed dead, and he's like, we've heard stories about you. You're supposed to be able to hear all these things and look at all these crimes around you and look at all these dead people, and you didn't do anything to help them. And it kind of like just tries to guilt trip Superman, and he just kind of walks away, and then he sees out of the corner of his eye Lana Lang. He's like, "Wait a minute, what are you doing here?" And she's like, "Well, I knew you before you were Superman, so they threw me in this hole." And he's like, "What?" So he breaks her out and frees all those people, and then Lana dies after a little monologue exchange with Superman, and it's just like, oof, you know. So from that point, Superman is pretty ticked off that people of Russia that he thought he was keeping safe are being treated in such a way. So he like straight up murders Stalin with his laser vision and takes over as like the ruler of Russia or whatever. And it's pretty intense. He starts like cracking down on crime. He invades the Korean Peninsula to push out the United States and reunite the Korean people under his rule, and just starts doing this crazy stuff all over the world. And it leads to Wonder Woman actually being sent as ambassador for Themyscira, and she's like, "Wow, you're doing really good." Blah 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 blah. And this movie takes over place over the course of like multiple years. I think it's close to 20 or 30 years is the whole total time span of this movie. So as time progresses, like they do time skips and stuff like that. And around the time when he's first meeting Wonder Woman, this is one of the things I felt was entirely unnecessary to throw in. Superman leans in for a kiss, and she's like, "Well, hold on," and he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I thought this was what you wanted." And she was like, she says something along the lines of, "I grew up on an island full of women. What do you think?" And it's like, why are we throwing in? I don't know. It's unnecessary to throw in sexuality. I didn't think it did anything for the story, and I don't think in this context like a relationship between Superman and Wonder Woman was needed, especially considering what happens later on in the movie. It was just one of those additional things that they just threw in for the sake of throwing it in, and it was just unnecessary. Because right after that, she just leaves. She goes somewhere else, and then Bizarro, created by Lex Luthor, because he got some DNA or something off the handprints when Superman caught the satellite or whatever. So he was able to clone him and make Bizarro. In this movie, they refer to him, I think, as Superior Man. I think it's a really stupid name, so I'm just going to call him Bizarro because, I mean, that's what the character is based on. And what is happening is he shows up, starts throwing hands at Superman. Superman's like playing super defensive. He's like, "Hey, I'm not trying to fight. What is wrong with you?" So he's like throwing Superman through all these buildings and stuff, and he's like obviously killing all these people by throwing Superman through buildings. And Superman gets ticked off, and they end up going and fighting in the Arctic or something. And they're exchanging blows, and Lex Luthor's like, "Oh man, he's losing. Hey, crank up his juice," because he's got like some machine that controls his strength or whatever. So he starts cranking it up. He's just, still getting his butt beat, so he keeps cranking it. And eventually Bizarro, he gets the cracks across his face and stuff like that. Because before that, he obviously looked like a regular person. So he starts getting all the cracks and turning gray and like losing hair. So he kind of looks like the New 52 version where he's like cracked gray and he's got like just one spot of hair. And it gets to the point where he's got too much power. He gets like so bloated, he's like a blob. And then he disintegrates in Superman's hands. And Superman's like, "Oh, okay, I guess the thread's done with." Superman is very nonchalant about just throwing hands when he needs to, I guess. I mean, it's pretty brutal. There is some swearing in this movie, and there's some pretty graphic fight scenes, especially when Batman fights Superman. That's when it gets really graphic. So I think from there, I think the next thing that does happen actually is that some point in this part of the movie, we're introduced to Hal Jordan. He's introduced with the president, I think it was Kennedy. Him and Lex are like, "Hey, so we found this alien spaceship, and we want you to be the leader of this new division of the army." And they pick up the lantern ring, and they're like, "Yeah, this is going to be it, but it's going to take us time to re-engineer the technology." So, I mean, that's your first intro, and then later on, I think it's 20 years after that, is when that whole thing happens. So the next major thing that happens is earlier you're introduced to Batman, who he's just blowing stuff up. Like, Batman in this one does not have the no-kill thing. He is straight up murdering citizens and stuff just to prove a point, like blowing up buildings and stuff. So at this point, Batman figures out how to somehow trap Wonder Woman using her own lasso, and trap her and give her commands basically. Because in this continuity, I guess, the lasso it compels you to tell the truth. That's the normal thing, but apparently you can just tell somebody to do something and they have to do it. They have to comply with it or something. And so he ties her up and he makes her call out to Superman, and Superman shows up. And that's when Superman's like, "Oh, I can see your brain," because he's talking about how smart, or Batman's talking about how smart he is and how he outsmarted him. And Superman's like, "Well, your brain's nothing to brag about." And he says, "Look down," and he's got a bomb in his chest. He's like, "Oh, you think you're going to stop me with that?" He's like, "No, I'm going to stop you with this," and pushes a button, and all these red sun solar panels just pop out and just shoot him with the red radiation. and he gives the monologue of, oh, you think you're so big and bad, but look at this, there's some lamps take you down, and it's just some serious trash talk, and he just starts giving Superman the work. At one point, he like grabs it, or Superman tries to punch back. Batman just catches his arm and breaks it in 3 places. Like, it gets kind of graphic, and he's just like smacking him down, and then he picks him up and drags him into the hole with more red lamps at the bottom. Throws him in the hole and seals it. He's like, "You're gonna stay in there until I say you can leave." And then Wonder Woman like somehow just magically just finds the strength and just breaks her ropes, or breaks the lasso, and like she said it was linked to her for some or somehow or for something. So it like she zaps it and she gets like just blown with like magic, and she like turns old and wrinkled, and she's got like gray hair, and she looks like a little mummy almost. And she goes and rips out the generator, and then she kind of just like falls over, and she's like, "Oh, I'm done." And then Superman comes out of the hole because that was the generator for the lamps, and he comes out and he's like, "Well, I'm gonna reform you. I'm gonna put this chip in your brain to make you think like a Soviet, and you're done." And Batman's like, "No, I'm not," and pushes the button and blows himself up. So I was like, "Whoa!" It was pretty intense. I thought it was really cool. I thought it was a cool twist on the Batman, just like full, just like savage, just saboteur, just trying to take down the government just by any means necessary. Doesn't have his no-kill rule. He's just like down with communism and down with Superman. Let's take back the country. So I thought that was a really cool, spin on Batman as a character, and for what the context of this story, I just thought it was so cool. And so after that, Wonder Woman's like, "Yeah, I think we should be done. I'm just gonna leave," and she kind of takes off, and because at that point, Superman's using basically anything to instill his rule. So he's like putting, excuse me, like I mentioned how he threatened Batman. He's like inserting chips into people's brains and basically taking away their free will and enslaving them into monotonous jobs like janitors and like laundry people with no like free will or anything like that. Straight up communist. At some point, I think it was before the Batman fight, actually, Brainiac shows up and miniaturizes Stalingrad. And so it's part of his whole propaganda thing. Is Superman is trying to find a way to resize it, and he fights Brainiac and like reprograms him so that he's working for him. And that's part of the whole chip thing. Is Brainiac is like helping him put all these chips in people's brains, taking them over and stuff. All kinds of craziness. So we go through another time jump, and at this point, Superman is kind of like super controversial and just like thinking about what he's gonna do, and he's like debating with Brainiac what he wants to do, and Brainiac's just like, "Yeah, just go kill him, just kill them all, just go take out the United States." And he's like, "Whoa, dude." Superman's like, "Hey, I mean, I understand Lex Luthor's a threat, but that seems a little bit too far. I'm not trying to kill anybody. Because at this point he barely killed anybody for the like taking over and stuff like that. Because you see big and destructive guy coming, you're not likely going to fight too hard after he takes away your weapons and things like that." So he's like, "Well, this has remained bloodless. I don't want to kill anybody." And Brainiac's like, "But it's only 4.6 million people that are going to die." And he's like, "I don't think you understand. This is not an option." He's like, "Well, I think the United States made that call for you." And this is when Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Marine Corps show up, which is a pretty cool thing. I thought it was pretty dope. So this is the first time we see John Stewart, and I thought it was pretty appropriate because they threw in that, one of John Stewart's backstories is he was a U.S. Marine sniper. So the fact that they threw him in there was pretty cool. They threw Guy Gardner in too, so when Superman's fighting all the lanterns, Guy is like one of the guys struggling to use a ring. I thought that was kind of dumb and disrespectful to the character, because Guy is one of those ones that's never been a faltering Green Lantern. But that's a topic for another time. But I thought it was pretty cool that they included him. So they included 3 of the bigger Earthling lanterns from main DC continuity. So I was pretty happy about that. But Superman gives him all the work, and Wonder Woman shows up, and she's like, "Hey, quit your fighting, knock it off." And Superman's just like, "But I'm doing a good thing." And she's like, "No, you're not. You're an idiot. We're cutting ties with you. No one is ever going to see Themyscira again. Men are all bad." And she kind of bounces. So the way they used Wonder Woman in this movie was just like a representation of like women and like lesbians, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I think it was her inclusion. I mean, she was in the comics, so I mean that part was accurate. But throwing in the side stuff was just kind of funky. Because at least from my recollection in the comic, even after everything Superman did, she still stood by him, and he took care of her when she became wilted and stuff. When I think it was actually in the comics, it was a nuclear bomb. It wasn't her lasso. Batman tried to kill Superman with a nuclear bomb that was like built into him. He blew himself up, and Wonder Woman threw Superman out of the blast radius and took the full brunt of the nuclear explosion. I could be wrong on that because I don't think she ever appears in the comic again after that. But like I said, we'll get into that when we get into the breakdown, I think next week. So I think Wonder Woman's character was okay. She didn't do any actual fighting. She didn't do anything for the story, really. It was just, she was just in there to be in there. I think she did a lot more in the comics. So I think it was okay. I didn't really care for it. It was like she was just thrown in for representation's sake, and I just don't like it when they use characters for that. I think if you're going to create or use a character, give it some meaning, because I think representation is like, it's just pointless if it's not going to mean anything. I mean, as a Mexican American, I don't want you to include a Mexican character just so you can say you have one on the screen. That's dumb. If you're going to create a character or use a character, make them have a purpose. And it just seemed like in this movie it wasn't really the case. Because after this whole thing happens, after she leaves, Superman proceeds to like just destroy the Green Lantern, just throwing them around, tossing them around, just giving them like 1-2 KO punches. And then he decides, right then he calls Brainiac. He's like, yeah, Brainiac, we're invading the U.S. I'm going to go take out Lex Luthor. At this point, Lex Luthor's president. I'm not talking about the U.S. stuff because they're not incredibly important. It's mostly, I mean, obviously the story is about Superman. So when he shows up at the White House, Lois Lane comes out and she's like, here, remember this? And it's Stalingrad. And he's like, well, how'd you get that? I've been working on a way to resize that for years, decades even. And she's like, I don't think you did. And Brainiac's like, yeah, boss, the resizing technology's been here this entire time. You told me not to use it. And Lois is like, yeah, this is like a self-reflection. Like this is what you want the world to be. Your little world in a glass jar, that's supposed to be perfect, but you're never going to accomplish that. And I think you know that, and that's why you haven't resized it and why you're acting this way. And he just kind of has like a change of heart, and then Brainiac's like, oh yeah, BT dubs, I was never under your control. And he starts firing lasers and going nuts. And then Lex Luthor pops out with battle armor, and he's like, Superman, let's go. And they like work together to defeat Brainiac. But upon his defeat, they're like, oh snap, he set his spaceship, which is for some reason powered by black holes. He set it to self-destruct in case he was ever defeated. So Lex Luthor's like, oh no, we're all gonna die. And Soup's like, you know what, I can take care of it. And Lex is like, but even you, that's gonna blow up. He says 14 million mile radius explosion. He's like, you're not gonna make it out of that. And Superman's like, I'll do what I do. And he tells Lex to jump out. So Lex goes with Lois, and Superman jumps out of the ship and starts pushing it into space. Has a flashback to one of his conversations from when he was a kid about with Lana, and then the ship blows up. And then it's like, whoa. You assume that Superman's dead. Which is a logical thing. I mean, 5 black holes, 14 million mile radius. I mean, it's pretty big explosion. So then we flash forward to Lex Luthor giving like a presidential address, and he's like, hey, so I mean, with Superman gone, communism is going to fall. We're already seeing riots in Russia, and I think it's time for me to retire, so I'm resigning from this. I'm going to leave you in the good hands of my vice president, Jimmy Olsen, who, in this is another one of the other dumb thing I didn't like, was they made Jimmy Olsen black in this one. And historically speaking, apart from the Supergirl TV show, which is utter garbage, well, I'll get into this some other time though. That's the only time he's ever depicted as an African American. So they decided to do it for this animated movie too, which is just dumb. There's no reason to change characters, especially like he's like a fanboy redhead white guy from, he's been in comics forever. So I personally just thought that was another stupid change. It's entirely unnecessary. Just if you want to use a African American character, just use one. There's so many. It's just dumb. There's no reason to change characters. But so he makes him president. So Jimmy Olsen is now the president, and he steps down and he goes and lives his happy life with Lois Lane. And then in the crowd, it pans over, and it's like Superman just walking away, dressed in obviously civilian attire and stuff like that. And it's implied he just goes about living his life. And then the movie just kind of ends. So the ending of this movie was way different from the ending of the comic. The ending of the comic was so just weird. looked like. I'll get into it next week with that video, but like it was just weird. It was nowhere near as simple as, yeah, Superman survived and now he's just walking around. It was similar, but it ended in a much different way. I think there was more after that. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the story in a wrap. I don't think I missed anything too major. Like I said, they use a lot of characters, but not all of them play huge roles. Like some of the other side characters here and there. So I mean, I already recommended it earlier, but if you can find it cheap somewhere to rent or something like that, or if you already have a streaming service where it's available, I would give it a shot. I thought it was an enjoyable movie. Given what it's about, I think the difference between so a few years ago they tried to do a storyline where Captain America came out and he was an agent of Hydra his entire life, and people like flipped out about it. So what's the difference between Captain America being Hydra and Superman being a representation of communism? Well, the difference is they tried to do that with Captain America in their main continuity, whereas Superman's was an Elseworld story, so it was a one-shot comic. There was one of it, and that was it. They're not trying to change the entire history of a character like they did with Captain America, which is why people were so outraged, because people have a lot of emotional sentiment with Captain America, both in like what Captain America is supposed to represent, their perception of what he's supposed to represent, and just his character and how he's been written throughout the course of his entire history. So people were like, oh, so you're just going to make him, he's just evil now? He's just the baddest guy? All these stories are pointless, and just like freaking out because it was part of the main continuity. If you're going to do something that drastic, I am a firm believer that you shouldn't touch the main continuity. You should do your own like Elseworld what if story about something. Like there's times in writing where it just looks like they ran out of ideas, so they just want to do something drastic to rile people up to get interested to go out and buy the comics to see what they did and how they changed it, and crazy. And that's definitely what it felt like. Side tangent, but I just wanted to address that because I imagined it would come up at some point, and I'll probably readdress this when I do my little breakdown of the book and going through the full story. So that's going to wrap it up. I don't really have anything else to say. I found it very enjoyable. I did not feel like I wasted my time watching it. I thought that the writing throughout this for the movie was very clear and concise. The production was good, very enjoyable. So if you have a way to watch it, or if you want to rent it or something like that, I highly recommend it, especially if you're a fan of either Superman or just comic stuff in general. And yeah, that's it. So if you enjoyed this video, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.